So don't blame me for the Oracle link, please. I don't only do Oracle. Just following on from what Andy was saying, this is pretty relevant stuff. What I'm talking about in the next 40 minutes or so, hopefully you'll see a big connection between the two and that they do work together. So I'll go on about that a little bit. But Ian yesterday did his presentation from a business card. I thought, shall I do my presentation from a business card today? No, I've spent too much time putting these slides together, and actually the only reason I've got this business card is because they took my laptop away this morning, so I couldn't change my slides while Andy was doing his presentation. So you're going to end up with a little bit from here and a little bit from there. So about a year ago I did a presentation at an Oracle conference, and it was at 9 o'clock in the morning on the morning after the party of the night before. So I knew I wasn't going to get a big audience, and I decided I'd buy bacon sandwiches. Now, forgive the religious insensitivity around that. It was probably a little bit insensitive, but I bought 10 bacon sandwiches, and I thought that would be enough. And actually, fair enough, about 20 people there. We had half a bacon sandwich each, and it kind of worked quite nicely. But I thought this morning, 100, 120, that's a lot of bacon sandwiches, a lot of my money going, and you'll have had a good bacon sandwich this morning. Anyway, so no bacon sandwiches today. Apologies about that. I think I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about me. That would be a pointless thing to do. Just to say I've been around the block a bit. I've been in this sector for a number of years. Hello, Paula, amongst other things. And I have done a lot of work around higher education and around enterprise architecture. But I've not got 25 years of enterprise architecture on my CV. What you'll find out about me is I do simple. I don't do complicated. None of the stuff you're going to see today is complicated. It'll all kind of make sense to you, and you'll all say, we're doing a bit of that anyway. So hopefully what you'll see is some of the practical outworkings of this project. And just to say, I do have my own user group. I've got a student user group of 2, Sam and Cleo. They're at Leeds and Bristol at the moment. So I know all about what students are going through at the moment. I feel like I am experienced. You'll all know these headaches. I've been at this conference for 2 days. Some of you have been 3 days at this conference. Certain themes coming out over and over again. Duplicate applications, room booking systems, CRM systems. People have been talking about having tens of CRM systems in their universities at the moment. What does that really mean? Business owners don't know what's happening to their data. They're very protective about their data, and they won't allow that data to be used around the institution, which means we get other data silos being created. Reporting and the external feeds are expensive to develop, really expensive to change, and are going to continue being so. And then the need for agility, the need to be able to deploy new functionality quickly while having these older systems around that are hard to change and hard to govern, and in fact the governors won't allow those systems to change quickly. So how do we respond to that? So these are the common problems, and every institution can come up with a diagram like this. This is taken, roughly speaking, from one institution that I worked with, but it could be any, and I draw your attention. No, I'm not going to draw your attention to any of that. You know what it looks like. At the same time as we've got this spaghetti going on in our organisations, and we're desperately trying to pedal to keep everything going, we're being told to do more with less, or as was mentioned yesterday, to do better with what you've got. It's all very well, but actually if the things are getting more complicated, if new systems coming up, if the IT is being built elsewhere, how do I manage to deal with that? I need it now. The departments, the schools are out there saying, give me my stuff now, and if you don't, I'm going to build a system to do it, and you're going to have to integrate that into your spaghetti diagram, which makes it even harder. The cottage industry, the Excel industry, the Access industry, it's been mentioned this morning already. I don't often agree with the philosophy of Mike Tyson, and apologies for Frank Bruno fans, but it's actually quite an interesting quote, and I think it does apply. I'm sure you'll be able to figure out how this is relevant to you. We put in place plans, we put in place strategy, we think we're going to do these great new things or improve this or better that, and then the system goes down. The student record system, registration's coming up. What do? we get knocked out and we get focused on just doing what we've got to do to keep the lights on. So the next few slides are going to be talking about the project that I've been involved in and the work I've been doing with some institutions around a thing called the Information Hub. And just to say, you're all in a different place on this journey. No one is at the beginning of this journey. If you're at the beginning of this journey, it's probably because you joined your institution last week, and there may be one or two of you who are at the beginning of your journey. But there's no institution at the beginning of this journey. Everyone's somewhere along the journey. So these ideas will be relevant at certain places at certain times within your institution. I'm going to trip up this carpet. So apologies if I go flying. We could do two things. We could carry on in a true British style. We could just carry on and try and keep doing what we're doing a little bit better. Maybe some of you feel that's the only option you've got because you've got no money. Or we could think strategically. And in thinking strategically, I'm really not trying to be clever about some of the new ideas floating around the enterprise architecture world of business design and business strategy and things like that, although we should be involved in those areas. What I'm talking about is just doing better with the information that we've got within the organisation. And hopefully we've got time for this. I just wanted to do a quick survey. Hands up if your institution employs a full-time enterprise architect. Interesting, so probably about 20%. Keep your hands up. Hands up if those enterprise architects report directly to the CIO or one step removed. So we're down to about 3. Now I would suggest, 4 possibly, I would suggest having that enterprise architect role at a senior level reporting very closely into the CIO is a huge benefit if you want to do some of these sort of things. You may not be there yet, but just think about that as you move forward as institutions into the future. Being able to access the business strategy through the enterprise architecture function, hugely important. So what we did on the Information Hub project was a slightly different approach. It was an enterprise architecture-based approach, but we did start from a slightly different perspective. And I'll be talking about a project that I started working on at Imperial College, which then moved on to be a Jisc project with a number of other institutions. This is a slide stolen from University of Washington, on the west side of the United States, not DC. And I love this slide because it encapsulates a lot of the problems we're trying to deal with and a lot of the objectives we're trying to meet within our institutions. So just for the moment, forget the bit in the middle. But on the top and on the bottom, you've got the stakeholders, you've got the people who are looking to get information out of the institutional system, if you like. People consuming reports, governors, report writers, architects, stakeholders. Those are the people who are trying to get stuff out of us. On the left and the right, some of the key objectives, if you like. So people want clear reporting. So we talk about analytics, we talk about big data and things like that. Essentially, people want trusted, clear reporting. They want to be able to consolidate their systems. But actually, it's quite hard because we don't know whether that system's really important, whether we need both of these CRM systems, indeed, whether the owner of that CRM system will let us archive it or shut it down. And that's quite often the biggest problem. How do we justify retiring a system? Integration, that's spaghetti. Some of you will come across the concept of services-oriented architecture. I think that's a grand title for just making that integration spaghetti simpler. And by the way, if we're doing integration, that's only one step away from data returns and data collection because we're transforming data and sending it somewhere. So it's much the same idea. Top right, data governance. Who owns the data? Who is the custodian of the data? If I've got 3 systems, which is the master system? Which is the master record? If I want to make changes to a system, what's the impact on my other systems? If I've got this integration spaghetti, am I going to have to do this huge regression test because one change in one system is going to have a knock-on effect on 10 other systems? And then bottom right, this need for agile development. How do I make changes to my architecture, to my systems architecture, quickly. How do I make mobile applications available to students? How do I create that fast analytics? How do I prototype? When I've got these behemoth systems behind the scenes that cannot be changed within a 6-month time frame? Everything we talk about revolves around this central pivot, the information hub. What I'm talking about in this project, what I'm talking about this morning, is the one thing that doesn't change. So your processes change, your people change, your governance models change, your business objectives change, but the one thing that doesn't change is your information. The information about a student or a course or a room or a resource or a budget. That information as metadata rarely, if ever, changes. The only reason that would change is if your whole business model changed, and then you might extend it or grow it. But essentially, those information artifacts don't change. So what we've been doing on the Information Hub project is elaborating on that and using that as the central pivot to all of these other things. And this is just the start of a journey. I started some work at Imperial College about 18 months ago, and there we were looking at how do we start? If we're going to use the information model or the information artifact as a starting point, how do we start? A number of universities I talked to have started bottom up. So what they've done is they've collected all of the data items, the data artifacts from all of their systems and put them into a big spreadsheet and tried to make sense of them. That's one way of doing it. University of Washington, which is the model that we followed, took a top-down approach. Look at the information as if I was building a university from scratch, and what information systems would I need within that university? Forget suppliers, forget vendors. What information would I need to run that university? That's essentially the approach we took at Imperial. And then a number of other institutions have taken the approach of buying a whole bundle of tools, sometimes from one vendor, sometimes from multiple vendors, and expected those tools. Am I boring anyone? I'm a bit still. Expecting those tools to actually do this job for them. And I think most of the people who have tried that have found the tools themselves won't do the job. University of Washington, I think, had a brilliant idea, and in my nature as a simple person who steals stuff from other people wherever I can, they had done a lot of the good work to start with. So I took this work along to Imperial, and we worked together at Imperial to try and elaborate on this work. And what we did was something that you could probably sit in a room for a morning and do yourselves. But essentially, we sat with a number of business users, a number of business analysts, a number of systems users, and I know some of you institutions have already done this. I know Luke's done this at Bristol. This stuff, again, is not rocket science, but it allowed us at least to start to think, what are the key business entities that matter to an institution? We know that a person is an entity that matters to an institution, whether that person is a student, a research assistant, member of staff, a teacher, whatever that person might be. And in fact, that person might be performing several roles, but some of their core attributes are the same. So that's an information entity. All sorts of other information entities on there. This was Imperial College, so we're developing this work, and this is over the last 2 years. Talked about data language earlier. Andy, wherever he's gone, was talking about data language. We talked about concepts. If we can't translate our information artifacts into the language that people speak around our universities, we are going to miss a huge trick. We're not going to be able to relate to the business. So at Washington and then at Imperial, we started to catalogue some of these concepts, some of the data language we use around the institution, and started to marry up those concepts to the business entities. So that when someone started talking about contingent workers or programs or all sorts of things on their year of program, we could map that directly onto the information model. And then once we've got all of this, at Imperial, we actually built a little tool, very simple little tool at Imperial, where we could store all of this information that could be shared and reused across the institution. And the nice thing about this kind of tool is, and you can query it. So I can start to put all sorts of relationships together within this repository, which connect my business entities to my systems, my interfaces, my governors, whoever else might be a stakeholder in this, and I can say who owns what data, who governs this data, which systems are accessing room bookings, which systems are updating this piece of information that's a core piece of information that my data governor might want to know about. All sorts of connections we can make across there. So we did this for about 6 months, I guess, at Imperial. Very rapid project. We reached a point where Imperial were able to say, and this is a quote, this takes us a big step towards our goals. And we started off with these concepts, and we ended that stage of the project at Imperial with the platform and the methodology to manage change. Now, things move on, and Imperial acquired a new CIO, and that CIO wanted to get his feet under the table. So we had a bit of a hiatus at Imperial, but I don't like leaving things in hiatus, so I then started to work with 5 other universities and Jisc, and we took the Imperial work, we took the University of Washington ideas, and we decided we'd build out that model that we built at Imperial, test it out with 5 institutions, which is a small subset of the 180 or 500 or whatever it is in this country. But we wanted to really sort of drill into that and make sense of it and make sure it was a ratified model. What we also want to do, which was very important in this project, is not just leave people with a pretty picture. Because, dare I say, enterprise architects have a reputation of just drawing the pictures instead of actually delivering stuff. And if they do deliver stuff, it's the day-to-day stuff rather than really strategic change. So what we want to do is instantiate some of these ideas by building a platform which could be used for data analytics and for data collection. Those all sounded very familiar. There are a lot of hooks into what's happening with HESA and what's happening with Jisc at the moment, and we're not doing this in isolation, trust me. We agreed with Jisc that we would build a prototype which would address one of the problems that Andy raised this morning, or would start to address what Andy was raising this morning. From our research, we figured out that about 3 full-time equivalents was what most institutions are employing to do data returns every year. Some much more. Some are trying to do it with 1 person and really struggling. But that's quite a significant cost, even at the 3 level, every year. I went along to the Head-It workshop that Andy was mentioning earlier on, quite an early one, so that was quite useful to work in partnership with them. And I got to hear from the collection side what a cost it was to the industry. So it was very clear to them that there was a problem that needed fixing. So this was way before cached, way before data futures, but certainly an input into that. And then around about the same time, some of you will know SUMS Consulting, Southern Universities Management Systems, I think, Systems Consulting. I did a piece of work with them where I interviewed 24, 26 institutions. Some of you are here today. Some of you may not even know that I did that interview because it was through the planning department. But we did a big report on maturity of BI in those institutions, and there was a huge range. Andy was absolutely right this morning. There was a huge range, huge diversity, no correlation between size, but the same messages coming out over and over again. It's hard to build a data warehouse or a BI environment. We're buying tools that will do a little bit, but they don't scale out, or we're buying these massive tools that scale out, but we find them really hard to work with. So we did appreciate through this prototype that there was an opportunity for some universities to make use of analytics capabilities from this platform. Now, we're not saying that everyone would do that. A lot of you have already invested in BI technologies, but you could actually use your BI technologies against this platform. I won't go through the next few slides in detail because obviously Andy's covered these, but you will be familiar with this. This is the big one. Number of rejections, number of institutions, further education and higher education institutions, number of collectors and number of collections per year. So when Andy talked about the 93 collectors, of course some of them are collecting more than once a year. So the sums are extraordinary. And this could be a diagram out of a data futures slide set. This is absolutely where we were coming from with our prototype. We wanted to demonstrate what you could do with an information model in delivering to collectors within the sector. One slight difference, and this is something I guess not for debate this morning, but at some point there will be a discussion with HISA about, is this new data futures world a pull model or a push model? Because institutions will want a push model. They'll want to be able to say, I want to submit my data to HISA now. I want to be able to look at my data before it goes to HISA. HISA might well turn around and say, we're going to have a pull model where on a certain date, we're just going to get your data. Discussion for another day. The prototype had 3 activities. We were going to build out the information model, we were going to prototype analytics, and we were going to prototype data collection. It was all built with Jisc, with 5 institutions, and it was built by Virtual. Did I mention the 5 institutions? Did they come up on a slide? I might have glossed over that. But Plymouth, York St John, King's College, UCL, and Birmingham were the 5. And if you're from one of those institutions, you didn't know what was going on, I'm very happy to talk to you afterwards. There they are. I must have changed my slide order last night at about midnight. I don't remember doing that. So we built the prototype, and this is all very low budget, very low key. We're not trying to boil the ocean with all of this. It wasn't a £1 million project. Trust me, it wasn't a £1 million project. We generated some code, and that code demonstrated what you could do. You could load data from a very simple file, and that file might say all students, all courses, all students on courses, a piece of information you would have to put together anyway for HISA, for all of your other returns. As Andy said, you're putting this information together quite regularly. What the little prototype could do was it would allow you the opportunity to map your data columns to the model within the prototype, and it would then load up the data into the prototype. You could do some certain mapping if you wanted to, so for instance on 1, 2, 3 to A, B, C, or again just as an exemplar of what you could do. And then the returns interface in the prototype showed you the returns that are coming up that are due, the status of the data, whether it was ready for collection, and indeed gave you some options to either manage that data, preview it, download it, have a look at it, and then button on the right to send it. And that send option is essentially to send the data to the collector. I'm ready, the data's fine, I previewed it, it's gone, and it goes off the list until it's rejected, in which case it comes back on the list. But if it's not rejected, there's another screen which would show you all of your returns that have been accepted. And as a byproduct, and this is very much a byproduct because we totally understand what's going on with Jisc at the moment with the BI project and HISA. We don't want to over-engineer things, we don't want to duplicate effort. But we did see a byproduct on this, which is essentially, as an institution, you could load up some of your own data that's not the kind of data that needs to be collected by HISA, or by NHS or whoever, and you could start to perform some analytics feedback. So the information model itself is a transformed model, a bit like a data warehouse in the cloud, which would then allow you to do your own institutional feedback. And the nice thing about that is you can start to do some really quite clever stuff. If I'm a small institution and I want to do some predictive analytics, it might actually be beyond my budget, beyond my capability to do some of that. But if I can share some of that development cost with partners who are also using the model, then I can build some quite complex things around space management or space utilization or course profitability or marketing research. And all of that data is still private. It's still secure within your institution, but the development, the code, the cost of that is shared. So the conclusion so far, and I need to keep an eye on the time as well because I think we're overrunning a little. The conclusion so far is this stuff is all ambitious. And some people I've talked to have left it at that. They've said, well, it's too ambitious, it's going to be too hard. It seems so simple, we've not been able to crack it over a few years, it must be impossible. But the flip side of that is doing a project like this, working with the 5 institutions we worked with, working with Jisc in a very low budget, small, low profile project, we've demonstrated that there's also low risk and low cost to doing something like this. So as we move this project forward, and I'll talk about that in a moment, the cost, the financial cost and the resource cost is very small on each institution because we're actually doing it in a shared model. And this sector really should do more sharing. You're all doing very similar things. So we want to get the sector working together on that. Moving forward to a pilot, which is the next stage of the project, and then to a full implementation, which is the final stage of the project. How does this work commercially? Well, essentially, it's like any cloud service. There will be a subscription model, institutions will pay. We'll probably figure out a scheme where a big institution pays more than a small institution. We'll probably work out a way where you can subscribe to the analytics only, or to some data collections, or to multiple data collections. Going forward, all of that's up for grabs. We've got to decide how that will work, but the model is essentially a subscription model. If we want, let's say HISA decides in 2 years, not whenever Data Futures comes in 3 or 4 years, but in 2 years they want to make a change. So you can all either, as individual institutions, make that change for your institution, or if it's a big enough change and you're on the platform, you can share the cost of making that change on the platform. If you want to do complex analytics, or if other data collections aside from HISA make changes to their data collection, share the cost of that as well. And by the way, the model itself is a free byproduct. So what we don't want to do is make this model we build a commercial piece of code. There's no point in doing that, because you can use that model internally, and that's a head start to that enterprise architecture that I talked about before. We've reached the stage now where we were looking for pilot funding for the next stage. We want to ratify the model. I can today, or Jisc can today, give you the results of the first stage, the prototype. We can give you all of that. We can show you a demonstration of the prototype if you like. Next stage, we want to build a shareable repository. That repository is at the moment in a tool which I hesitate to mention called Excel. We want to move that into a repository, and now we're looking at which repository we should use. And there are a number on the market, and some of you will have done some research on that already. But we want to choose the right model for the market. We want to agree the relationships and timelines with other projects. So there's no point doing any of this stuff if HISA or Jisc, indeed, are going to do the same thing in the same timeline. But what is important is I think some of the institutions want to do some things in a faster speed than HISA can actually move. It's nothing against HISA, it's just what HISA is. So we're doing things for institutions in the 6-month time span, whereas HISA might be doing things in the 3-year time span. We are looking for some more institutional partners. We had 5 in the first phase. We would like 7 or 8 in this stage. And I would love to receive your business cards at some stage, or you can contact me. I'll give you my details afterwards. We do want to take this forward. We've got a proposal for an institution which you can take to your governance team or whoever to talk about it. The costs are minimal, the resource requirements are minimal, the benefits are potentially quite significant. And we do want to do this fast, because institutions have a problem now. It's all very well saying we'll do something in 3 years' time. But if you remember what I was saying at the start, this is more than about data collection. It's about your information architecture. So we want to do something quickly. And we are at a bit of a crossroads at the moment on the project. So Jisc have said, if you find 10 partners, and if we can find the right way of working with HISA Data Futures, then we'll work with you, or we'll consider working with you. I've got another partner in the sector who said, we want to work with you, we just need to ratify it within our own organisation. So we do have sponsors lined up. We want some more institutional partners. We could even do this as a crowdfunding exercise, but I would actually rather do this with a sponsor, because I think not so much for the costing and the commercials, but more because it's a future-proofing of the exercise. How are we doing for time? It's 5 to 11. 5 to 11. Excellent. And given I started late, I think I'll talk for at least another 15 minutes. Or not. Or not. A few questions just to finish on. This is essentially a conclusion. Apologies if I've thrown a lot at you. There is quite a lot of substance to this, but there are also some easy and quite simple steps forward that we can take with some of these ideas. And obviously the slides will be available, and I'm happy to talk. Will this fit with my internal strategy and people? It's a simple approach, and I would say probably yes, because there are a lot of organisations that are doing say, business process transformations. But if I think of King's College, they're doing a business process transformation, but they're tying that exercise into the information model, the Information Hub, because they want to understand how the processes touch the information. A key part of what they're doing. We talked a little bit about how this sits with HESA Data Futures. I've attended the supplier briefing for Data Futures. I'm going to the consultation in, whenever it is, a couple of weeks in London. Fully engaged with that. There is no point in doing this if we're not in partnership with HESA Data Futures. We might be doing things at a slightly different pace, but we'll be doing things in collaboration. And one of the options is that this becomes the pilot for Data Futures. That's somewhere down the line. We've got to think about how that's going to work. The scope is definitely not limited to HESA data. I said earlier we want to do a lot around estate, we want to do a lot around services. We can do more than that within our information model. Are the terms aligned with those other approaches? Probably not yet, because we've had a rapid prototyping exercise. We've needed to get the job done, essentially. But we've now got an exercise to do that. I won't cover any of the other questions, if that's all right, because I've essentially got to the end, and I do want to leave time for a couple of questions. And I want to let you get off to your coffee, because you have been very patient this morning. It's been a long morning, I think. But essentially, leave you with a couple of things. If you want to speak to someone at Jisc about this, Michael Webb is your man. He can also give you some of the content. I can give you the content on that. I'm a bit of a tweeter, so if you want to follow me, there's my Twitter, whatever, handle, I think. You can see a bit more about the project at the moment. The prototype project itself is an archive project in Jisc terminology. We're now moving on to the pilot, which is the next phase of the project. And after what Penny was saying last night about Lewis Hamilton, I thought if you wanted a nice, safe drive back to Edinburgh Airport this afternoon, I've got a car, and I drive just like Lewis Hamilton.